All right, next, Tom Gohring with the Water Forum. Good to see you.
Thank you.
And just to remind our audience, this is the second of the two longer presentations before we get to public comment.
Good morning, thanks. Good morning, thanks very much for having me. I'm very excited to be here today because I am very proud of the work that we've done on the American River to develop a sustainable flow regime. And I know that when I get excited, sometimes I talk fast. I also know that I'm trying to cram a whole bunch of slides into 15 minutes, so I'm going to flash through some. And let me start by saying, so I read the Delta Science Programs report with a lot of interest, and my reaction as I went through it was, yeah, we did that. Yeah, we did that. Yeah, we did that. And so I'm going to talk about some of our consistency with that we've in what we've done. But I think the more important issue for this presentation is that we've been at this task for a couple of decades, and we've spent a lot of money, and we've spent a lot of time and a lot of mental energy on coming up with something that works for this stream that we love right here in our backyard. And in reading the report, it reminded me that we've been on the road so long that we sometimes forget how we got here, and we tend to talk about, look at this great thing we have. And the report reminded me that there is a need to go back and talk about the process and the technical underpinnings. So with that, I am talking about the Lower American River, and so you guys can see that good. And it's a 23-mile. Whoops. It is a 23-mile stretch of stream downstream of Nimbus Dam to the confluence with the Sacramento. The watershed of the American River is those counties. All are part of those counties. It includes those cities and some unincorporated communities. And when I talk about we, the Water Forum, I'm talking about a very diverse group of folks who often don't agree on some very foundational issues, but they have come together and agreed on something called the Water Forum Agreement. It is dedicated to two co-equal objectives, a reliable...
I'm sorry, Tom, we're interrupting you. We want that animation. Is that something once we have your slides?
Dedicated staff. You will share this with all. And
yeah, I need it for
we'll
Friday.
We'll have it and we'll steal it. Thank you very much. If we have trouble with it, we're calling you.
Oh, you haven't yet. Two co-equal objectives. Reliable water supply for the region and protecting the Lower American River. And as part of that agreement, all of those diverse stakeholders agreed to develop an improved flow standard for the Lower American River. When I talk about the water half of our coalition, this is the way they view the region. To them, it's a water supply schematic. The Enviro members of our coalition, this is the way they view the region. To them, it's a stream. It's a living stream. It's protected by the state and federal Scenic Rivers Acts. It is something that needs to be sustained. And so, some words about the stream and our watershed. We exist in a highly altered stream, a highly altered state. This is a slide many of you have probably seen before. It basically says we used to have many miles of salmonid habitat, and we don't anymore. In fact, we used to have over 120 miles of habitat. Now we have a little over 20. But it's more than just the quantity, it's the quality. The previous habitat, beautiful mountain streams, over summering. They got to live their life cycle, parts of their life cycle, up there in that beautiful place. Now they need to exist on the hot valley floor. And that's a really important foundation of our flow standard, is recognizing this. One last sort of background slide. When we look at a flow standard in this region, we have the luxury of not having to drastically reallocate water from one use to another, because for the most part, it's a flow-in, flow-out watershed. The Folsom Reservoir is relatively small, and this graph shows you that the demand portion is a relatively small piece. Does that mean that we're ignoring the demand portion? Absolutely not. And in fact, if you look out there in that 2008 to 2013 period, you see that total demand in the region has actually gone down in recent history. So, when one talks about a flow regime, and this is from POF, one talks about turning knobs related to flow, things like, as Dr. Dahm mentioned, magnitude, flow, duration, timing, to influence primary regulators of integrity and ultimately influence overall ecological integrity. And that's the approach we've taken. But in a highly altered environment like ours, we've recognized that we can't get to a sustainable aquatic ecosystem with just that knob. I am going to talk about this knob today, the flow manipulation knob, but I really want to point out that the next knob down, selective cold water releases, is an integral part of our flow standard. Let me just say a couple of quick slides about those other things, because those other non-flow things, because they are things that this region is investing in. The folks in this region have committed to investing about $15 million in habitat management and ecosystem restoration over the life of the agreement. We sometimes get a little press on those things. You may have seen some of our gravel projects on the lower American River. We have an agreement that requires our water users to cut back their water use in dry years when the river is at its most sensitive condition. And at the most dry year, they would cut back to roughly their 1995 level of demand. We've been pursuing water conservation. We still have plenty of more work to do, but I am happy to report that in the last independent report we did on water conservation, we have seen over the last decade our per capita water use drop by about 20%. And yes, we have more to go. And part of that is because we have more meters to install. We're actively pursuing groundwater management. There are local governance structures. We have identified sustainable yield values. And we've been pursuing other things like eco-friendly landscaping. This is a website I'm particularly proud of. We funded this, and it was just launched recently. This is like the Sunset Western Garden book applied to eco-friendly landscaping, applied to this region. And so reducing water use, reducing runoff, reducing the pollution load in the runoff. And finally, we are putting a great deal of energy into upgrading the temperature management hardware that helps control the thermal condition in the lower American River. So what are our river-specific ecological goals? Well, there they are. They are to sustain an aquatic ecosystem, to restore and enhance natural processes, and to reduce stressors. And I won't read them, but what you'll see if you skim that list of sub-bullets is they are all related to our salmonids. Why? So I'm going to go through now a step-by-step comparison. Some of these I'll go through really quickly. In essence, again, I think when we go through there, the panel's 7-step process, it's pretty much check, check, check. I may have misunderstood the extrapolation process, but I'll address that in a minute. So I'm going to try to do these quickly. Stream segment classification, yes, absolutely. And we didn't have to classify the stream itself because we're dealing with one stream. We have classified our streams into reaches. They tend to be a pool riffle type of approach. Step 2, hydrologic analyses, you bet. We've been at this for a couple of decades. We have models, we have temperature models, we have flow models, we have PHAB sim analyses, et cetera. Site-specific field work, we've done it and we're doing it. We have probably a field crew out on the river right now. And I am, with a lot of ecological programs, when times get, times get tough, the first thing that gets cut is the monitoring budget. I'm really pleased that we've been able to really stay whole on that here in our stream. Step 4, extrapolation. So as I read the report, I thought I understood that extrapolation meant from the landscape scale to a stream-based scale, but I heard Dr. Dahm say that one component, and so in that regard, yeah, we haven't done that because we started with a stream-specific approach. I thought I heard Dr. Dahm this morning say part of extrapolation is to begin to extrapolate flow biology relationships. And we have done that, and I'll actually get to that in step 5. So step 5, I have several slides on this because this gets to the heart of the flow regime that we've developed. The hybrid approach said, think about processes like temperature, sediment management, sediment transport. Think about species. Well, we've done that. Again, we're looking at our 2 salmonid species. We have fall run, we have steelhead, and we're looking at processes. A lot of focus on temperature, but we're also looking at delta water quality, sediment transport, et cetera, et cetera. Why steelhead? I think we all know this. They're not doing well. They're listed. Population in the American River has dropped precipitously in the last decades. Why fall run Chinook salmon? This is a different variant of the slide that the last speaker showed. And although it does show that there is a cyclical nature to their population, what worries ecologists is that when we get into a valley of the population, the valley tends to get lower and lower every time we hit one. So we're worried about fall run. This is this is the nexus between flow and habitat. This is not the end-all be-all of our approach, but it is an important component. This graphs flow on the lower American River versus percent of maximum spawning habitat. And what you see, a couple things I'll point out, is there is a sweet spot in the curve. The red one's steelhead, the blue one is for fall run. There's a sweet spot right around 2,000 CFS. So one important takeaway is, on the lower American River, for these life stages, not all the time, but for these life stages, which occur at 2 different times of the year, more water's not always better. We've recognized that zone, and we've developed our flow regime so that most of the time, the great preponderance of the time, we're able to keep flows in that zone, in a zone that achieves 80% of the spawning rearing habitat values. So it's all about staying in a zone. How do we do that? We do that through specifying minimum flows. And we have an inherently adaptive approach that selects a different minimum depending on how much, on what type of water year it is, essentially. There are different relationships of this water, of hydrology versus minimum flow for different times of the year. And obviously in different years, then you pick a different value. It's important to note that we specify a minimum, not a maximum. So when reclamation operates Folsom Dam, they can operate above the minimum. This slide shows this is real information from last year, most of last year. And our minimum specified flow is the blue line. The actual release is the red line. First of all, notice the variability. Variability is an important thing for a flow regime. Also notice that reclamation didn't operate at the minimum until the fall. They operated close to the minimum parts of the year, but there are other times of the year, like June and July. This is what the science panel would call a flow block. This is a flow block about, as you can see in the very tiny note above that June-July period, that was for meeting delta water quality standards. So the flow standard specifies the minimum, helps keep us in that optimal range for habitat, but allows for the other flow blocks, which sometimes overlap one another. I need to say a few words about water temperature. On the lower American River, it's too warm for a healthy salmonid habitat sometimes. Even in wet years like 2005, 2006, sometimes it's too warm. In a dry year like 2008, it's often too warm. So our flow standard deals with temperature management a lot. How do we do that? We do that by developing a new temperature plan, a new temperature target every spring. It's done using some fairly sophisticated temperature models. It seeks the best possible temperature by changing when and how you manipulate the temperature control device that hangs on the dam. Since the 2009 BIOP, NIMS now has to approve that plan. It is scrutinized by stakeholders. Ultimately, it requires some really good technical tools and analysis. And, but, as I mentioned, the current temperature plan has one knob, and that's the temperature shutters. Reclamation has been implementing this flow regime and this shutter-based temperature plan since 2006. Since that time, we've been looking at a different way to skin the cat. This is about flow manipulation. Lower graph is a hydrograph.
Sports metaphors, please.
This is are we on the first 1 yard line? Are we? No cat skinning. I gotcha. Thank you. The lower graph is a hydrograph. The upper graph is a thermograph. What our modeling shows is through relatively modest changes in the hydrograph, we can get a much better temperature result in some years. You see there in 1959, this is model data, right? And in a 1959 type of year, a wonderful temperature result in a relatively small flow manipulation. 1966, really good result. The other years, not so much. That's something we have been calling the modified flow pattern. Then, and we've been working on that for a year or so, then this year hit. And you like that one too? Thank you. And the drought opened our eyes to a couple of things. And as a result, we're basically taking a bit of a step back, and we're now working on a slightly different approach. We actually hope to merge these two, the modified approach, the carryover storage approach. In essence, from an ecological standpoint, we're looking at some relaxation of ecosystem protection in several years, in above average and wetter years, so that we can keep an insurance policy of water behind Folsom Dam and guard against the fairly catastrophic impacts of a year like 2014. And we have a lot of work to do. We think it is a really great idea. We haven't figured out quite how to do it. As we look into this, we have to look at unintended consequences to the Delta, to the Sacramento River, right? And that's a big part of our challenge. As I mentioned, this is in response partly to the drought, but it's also the fact that we've observed something in our watershed. This is a 50-year trace of storage in Folsom Reservoir, and you can see two points, one in the 90s, one in the 70s, where the storage got really low. But what you also can notice, that's a half full line in the yellow. Since the drought of the 90s, Folsom has been exercised in a way that draws it down deeper more frequently. That tells us that our carryover storage idea, well, they did it before. They were carrying over more before. Maybe we can do that again. So it gives us some assurance. Finishing up with our regime. I've talked about salmonid habitat. I've talked about water temperature. We've also addressed things like sediment transport, pulse flows, et cetera. I'm not going to go into those today in the interest of time. Would love to have an opportunity to come back with either you and the staff to get deeper into them. I also do want to mention, though, we have a couple of additional protections built into this regime. One is a protection for ramping rates. Another is actually a ramping up scheme that helps avoid red superimposition. I see some nods. And we also have a process built into the standard that calls for something we call the Water Forum Dry Year Conference in a year like this one. And I'm happy to say that we have put that to really good use this year. It's been very gratifying as the facilitator of this diverse group of folks to see them sitting down on almost a bi-weekly basis, comparing notes on how we're going to get through this year. One of the things, we can't take direct credit for this, reclamation and NIMS and Fish and Wildlife take the real credit for this, but I can say that the Water Forum Conference process helped inform a real management action that took place 2 weeks ago, and that was a pulse flow on the Lower American River. It was a relatively small pulse, and because we have funding for monitoring, we have collected data that indicate that the pulse did its job. It helped stranded fry emerge from the gravel, and it helped begin outmigration. It's like, yes. Step 6 is about stakeholder interaction. We have basically had a continuous stakeholder process. Sometimes that's slow, sometimes it's really expensive, sometimes it's contentious. I would say I would sort of pool our stakeholder interactions into 3 pieces. One is a science team. We do have a team of scientists. I call them the ologists, really learned people who could give a much more scientifically informed description of what we're doing than I'm doing. And we also work very closely with reclamation and our resource agencies. And as I mentioned before, one sort of ratification of that cooperation is that NIMFS directly referenced and directly attached our flow standard as an RPA in the 2009 BIOP. Interaction between stakeholders. Yeah, that's sort of what my job is. It's these 4 diverse caucuses. Well, who are they? They're about 40 different organizations, very different corporate cultures, very different objectives, and yet they work together. All those folks come together periodically as needed. They also come together basically once a month, more frequently in 2014, in an interaction called the American River Group. This is a group that is unique to the American River. You've probably heard about the temperature group on the Sacramento. This is a temperature, flow, operations, power ecosystem group that meets once a month, convened by reclamation. Resource agencies are there, our stakeholders are there, the water forum's there, and they literally compare notes and share information that become the basis for the operational decisions on this stream. Step 7, adaptive management. Yeah, we got that. And I would group our adaptive management opportunities into sort of 2 teams. Wait, 2, I'm trying to do sport. I'm sorry, I can't do it. 2 flavors. One is inherent year-to-year adaptive management. Because our minimum flow approach is a sliding scale that is dependent on existing hydrology, there's an inherent adaptive mechanism there. And it not only responds to year-by-year changes in hydrology, ultimately responds to climate change as well. Same with our temperature approach. We reset that temperature target every year based on the amount of cold water sitting behind the dam in May, how much snowpack is up in the Sierra. The other flavor of adaptive management is on a much broader time scale. It's more of your classic adaptive management, set hypotheses, collect data, test hypotheses, lessons learned, make changes. And what more can I say other than it's built into the American River Group's approach. It's the driver for the monitoring that we do. I guess the other thing that I can say is that the new path we're treading down on a modified approach and a carryover storage approach is frankly a result of adaptive management. In 2006, when we published this thing, got it. And in the years since, we said, we can reach the goal line in a different play. No, yeah, okay. I'm trying on this, okay. In conclusion, I think we've met all of them. Depending on my interpretation of extrapolation, we either have or haven't. Next steps. We've been working with your staff. We hope to continue to do that. We are updating some of our models. You know, the model baseline issue when you're doing a long-term project is such a bugaboo. So you have to just keep updating them. We have to sort of finish walking the walk on this carryover storage option. I'm very optimistic. We have an EIR that we're working on. Hopefully we'll have that out in 2014. But I did say the same thing in 2013 about that document. And then, long-term implementation. Reclamation is implementing the 2006 version of that now. And as we make changes, our intent is that we would continue implementing those. Staff asked me to say a few words about the ideal ecological flow. Do I have time for that?
It's important to the discussion today, but I just wanted to remind you you've gone over. It was great.
I'm happy to stop.
No, don't. I want to know what this slide is. You see, you save those best ones for last, right? That's pretty clever. I think that. Go ahead.
When I think about an idealized flow for the Lower American River, I would start with these factors. They should look familiar. They kind of look like Dr. Dom's slide. And I would begin working on those, and I would be thinking about the 2 species of concern. Because it is such an altered system, because we are propagating a cold water fishery on the warm valley floor, I believe we would end up with the flow standard we have now as the ideal biological flow standard. We did it. Is there room for improvement? Absolutely, and that's what adaptive management is about. But we have a beautiful stream out there. It is the jewel of the Sacramento region. It has a wonderful fishery already, and our intent is to continue with the protections we've put in place and make them better, and try to keep those two fisheries and the integral environment sustainable for future generations. So thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Tom. I mean, I've been a fan of the Water Forum since the 90s as I watched you guys doing it, and it is good to hear. It's that combination of trying to focus on the science but also spending as much time on the people in the room, the thing I always call the ecosystem management of it, not the ecosystem management. It only really works when you can do both well. And so very helpful, and I appreciate it. It's messy and it's time consuming, and it's not just a notice and comment period. It's a much more engaged, real relationship of people, and you can see in what you've put together. You know, I can even envision what some of the conversations and the cross-training and the acknowledgement and appreciation of different needs and views and values that you managed in this community to pull together. I'm sure there's been a lot of strain and stress and arguments and all of that during the time, but that over time you've maintained that we're all in this together linkage, let's talk it through, is pretty impressive.
Yeah,
so,
you know, I have this gray hair and I'm only 25.
That's right. All right, let's turn it to questions. I'll start on this side this time.
I don't have anything specific. I'm just very impressed, and I'll just appreciate the homework you did to tie what you're doing to the science panel's recommendations.
I appreciate that. And as I mentioned, it was a good exercise for us.
Yeah, I think so. I think we could look at all those tributaries on staff's slide and think about what's already being done and how it matches up with the science panel's recommendations. So thank you for walking us through that. It was very constructive.
A pleasure.
I'll just add my thanks as well. That was very, very informative. And the graphics are wonderful. And the animation is great, too.
Yes, I should have been a cartoonist instead of a,
That's great.
I only have one, and we go way, way back on conservation, water recycling, other forms of wet water, are creating wet water in a stream. And while carryover storage, I totally get that, all the things that you had there, but nobody seemed to be going back to revisit the 2025 deadline for metering. You mentioned meters, but last night I had a conversation with several people who live in this area, and they had put meters, temporary meters, in their backyards that help them monitor what they are doing in anticipation at some point of the front, street level, bigger meters that the city's going after. And they said it was cost effective because they were able to save $600 over some period of, and of course water use was down. So, how do you make that part of the methodology here?
I just hope the creators of Nest were listening. It's a whole new market for them.
Good.
It's part of the fabric, the fabric of what we're doing. First of all, this region will meet the 2025 deadline.
I'm sure
for
of that.
fully metering.
Okay.
And then, of course, billing comes, a year after that. There's a reason why our per capita water use has gone down. Several reasons. One is, I think, the locals' water conservation programs. A lot of it, I think, is metering. Some of it is density changes. As more growth happens, we tend to build denser houses. It has a lower landscaping demand. Some of the recent downtrend may also be part of the economic downturn, and so there's a real worry about a rebound in that per capita, right? I guess the other thing I'd say is although many people really grumbled, I think SB 7X7 was a bit of a game changer, at least for this region. Many of the water district general managers that I work with on a day-to-day basis, almost overnight, went from what do I have to do to comply with the BMPs to how in the world do I get my per capita down? That may sound like a subtle shift, but that is a huge shift. And I'm going to get a little beat up for saying these comments in this forum, but it made a difference. It changed the focus, and we have more work to do, but I think it's getting done.
Well, at your next monthly meeting, bring up the issue of interim steps. 2025 is over 10 years away, and are there things that can be done that go directly to creating more capacity for carryover storage in your dams? I mean, it's to me the link is tight,
Mm-hmm.
and so have that discussion.
You bet. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much for joining us and for all the work that you and your colleagues have done. Lo these many years.